Hey, this is Efrem Smith, and welcome to another episode of City Beats. So glad to be with you. Now, I'm going to be talking about a couple of issues on this episode. One is the multi-ethnic church. Really, I can ask the question, should the church be multi-ethnic? Should it be multiracial? Should it be multicultural? And is one of the main reasons the church in the United States of America is in decline is because it is still very much segregated by race. It's one of the most significant signs of being homogeneous in the United States of any institution or system there is. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the multi-ethnic church and wrestle with that question. Also connected to that, specifically, should the church be multi-ethnic, be multiracial in the urban context? Cities are some of the most visible signs that we are an ever-increasing multicultural, multi-ethnic, multiracial nation. Cities also are some of the most unchurched, de-churched places in the United States of America. I mean, you could make exceptions like with the Bible Belt, Houston, Dallas, Jackson, Mississippi, Atlanta, Georgia, but I'm in California. And in cities like Sacramento, in cities like Los Angeles, in the Bay Area, these are some of the most unchurched, de-churched cities in the United States of America. New York, I think less than 5% of New Yorkers are in church on any given Sunday. I believe it's less than that in San Francisco. Sacramento, I think it's 8%. The last time I saw some data was 8% of those living in the city where I serve as a pastor are in a church on any given weekend. Doesn't sound like job security to me unless you do something. So should the church be multi-ethnic? Especially in the city, should the church be multi-ethnic? Now, let me start by, in case you're coming into this conversation or thoughts about the church and should it be multiracial, should it be multi-ethnic for the first time, I want to be able to shape this time so it's helpful for you. But if this is something you've been thinking about for a long time, you're in a church that is multi-ethnic, or you're in a church that you wish was multi-ethnic, or you walked away from the faith because you could not get your head and heart around why the church is segregated by race. No matter where you are, or if you're nowhere in this conversation, I'm hoping that I will provide multiple on-ramps for you to feel welcome, for you to get on this journey in the next few minutes with me. So, some people would say that the whole conversation about the church being multi-ethnic, the church being multiracial, began with a book that I have in front of me right now. The book is called Divided by Faith. Divided by Faith, Evangelical Religion, and the Problem of Race in America. This book, written by Michael Emerson and Christian Smith, is a must read if you care about these issues. It came out in 2000, and I'm going to share a little bit why this book coming out in 2000 hit me personally, had a significant role in why I pastor a church that is intentionally urban, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural. I'll get to that in a minute. But the reason why this book was so significant is it looked at the issue of race. Possibly by 2000, many people in the country maybe would have believed that we had made great progress in the issue of race. I mean, come on, we're going into a new century, so we've got to be better, right? I mean, we're doing great, aren't we? And so this book took a historical look at the issue of race in the United States of America, and specifically looked at times when the evangelical church was on the wrong side of the racial issue, when the evangelical church was actually participating in the racial divide, in racism, systemically, institutionally. And so Divided by Faith, Evangelical Religion, and the Problem of Race in America was an opportunity for Christians, for the church, to see the ways in which Christianity has played a role in the racial divide, not been the solution, not been the answer to the racial divide in our country. Now, you would go, this book, that sounds like bad news. Yes, but it's still important news. It's needed news for us to dive into. Why is it that still today you could look at the church in the United States of America and the old quote from Martin Luther King Jr. during the Civil Rights Movement still rings true, that the most segregated hour in America is 11 o'clock on Sunday morning? Think about that for a minute. Martin Luther King Jr. said the most segregated hour. He's like, if you really want to look at a place that shows us that we still have a ways to go when it comes to racial harmony, unity, beloved community, look at the church. Look at how people worship. Wow. That if you really want evidence that we still have much, much more to do when it comes to racial reconciliation, unity, harmony, beloved community, just look at how people worship. Wow, you would think that worship, that religion, that faith, walking with God would actually be the place we would go to get unity, to build bridges, to see beloved community, to see a sneak preview of heaven, to see Revelation 7:9 in the New Testament of the Bible actually come to life, a multitude that no one can count from every people, nation, tribe, language. That's what heaven's going to be like. And you would think that the church would be a sneak preview of that. But Michael Emerson and Christian Smith had to remind us in this landmark book, Divided by Faith, that faith has not always been, in the United States of America, the picture of heaven, a glimpse of what unity looks like. It's actually participated in the divide, in oppression, in brokenness, in a system, a social structure that is not biblical or biological, but is very real. And that's the issue of race, the structure of race, the system of race, the fact that we live in a racialized reality. This book brought all that out. And so, yeah, it wasn't the best of news. This was some bitter medicine to swallow. This was some spiritual Robitussin. And it wasn't the honey lemon flavor, just regular original. This was like drinking Listerine, not the green mint flavored Listerine, but just like the original. Oh, Lord, that's nasty. But here's the good news. That book was followed up by another book called United by Faith. United by Faith, this book was written by a group of Christian sociologists, Curtis Paul DeYoung, Michael Emerson, who wrote Divided by Faith with Christian Smith. So here's Michael Emerson back as a Christian sociologist to give some good news, along with George Yancey and Karen Kim. So we went from a book written by two white guys about the racial divide to a book written by a diverse team, 3 men and a woman, and George Yancey's African-American, Karen Kim is Asian. And so this book comes out, it follows Divided by Faith, and it came out 3 years later. 3 years later, United by Faith. And what United by Faith did that was awesome is it showed that all the news from the past is not bad. That there were actually moments when Christians, when the church was working to bring about racial unity, racial justice, racial reconciliation, whether that was visible in the civil rights movement that began in the Black church, but eventually the civil rights movement was a multiracial movement. There were white folks from the Catholic Church, from Protestant churches that in many cases risked their lives to be allies alongside African Americans in nonviolent marches, nonviolent protests, Jewish men and women, rabbis that risked their lives the same way. People that joined African Americans alongside them that believed in the beloved community vision of equality and justice and transformation that Dr. King and his team, because it wasn't just Dr. King. I mean, you can't say civil rights movement and not just think about Dr. Martin Luther King. You have to think about Fannie Lou Hamer, Rosa Parks, Ralph Abernathy, Andrew Young, Diane Nash, Jesse Jackson. I mean, it was a list of heroes and sheroes that began in the African American church, but it moved into a diverse movement, which is why United by Faith is a good title. We haven't just experienced being divided by faith in the United States of America. We've also experienced pictures, moments of being united by faith. The civil rights movement, the Azusa Street revival in Los Angeles, where you could point back to a Pentecostal beginning, not divided by black and white, by Church of God in Christ and Assemblies of God, but a moment, a Pentecost-like moment in the United States of America that was as multicultural as the book of Acts, chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost. Abolitionists, Puritans, Quakers, some owned slaves, but there were some that didn't, that spoke out against slavery, that believed that the Bible is a book of liberation, not a book of captivity. And so there are moments in a history in the United States of America where we see visible moments of being united by faith. And then what these Christian sociologists do is they also make the case that we could use more and sustainable glimpses, sneak previews of heaven, and that the multiracial, multicultural church could be the answer to the race problem in the United States of America. So Divided by Faith was like, in case you didn't know, there's a race problem. And United by Faith is, but the church, if it would strive to be multiracial, to be multi-ethnic, is the solution, the answer to the race problem in America. So the reason why these two books, Divided by Faith and United by Faith, were so powerful for me is because in 2002, I left my role as an associate pastor for youth and outreach at a multi-ethnic United Methodist Church in order to plant a church in an evangelical denomination. Let me back up a little bit and give you the abbreviated version of my story, because I hope that if you want to catch more of my story and more of what this show, City Beats, is all about, that you'll just keep watching episodes and you'll just keep coming back and telling your friends about it and telling your cousins and telling people that you don't like all that well, but you go, but today I'm going to show some grace and tell them you should check out City Beats. So a little bit of my story is I grew up in the Black church, the African American Baptist church. It's where I learned how to sing. It's where I learned that I was somebody special. It's where I learned God loves me. It's where I learned eventually how to preach, where I learned how to lead. Man, it was just significant impact. It's where I learned about justice and reconciliation, empowerment, the Black church. And so that will always be in me. I'm also influenced, and my faith journey has been impacted by an evangelical, multi-ethnic Methodist church called Park Avenue United Methodist Church in Minneapolis. It's where I first heard the term evangelical. It's where I first heard evangelical preachers, Tony Campolo, Mark Rutledge, African-American evangelical preachers, E.V. Hill, Tony Evans, Tom Skinner, John Perkins. It really had a significant impact on my life. And what I learned about evangelicalism is what I understood evangelicalism to be when it was first introduced to me. So this is not to get real political or to down somebody or anything like that, but I'm just saying I wasn't introduced to evangelicalism through Jerry Falwell or Focus on the Family and James Dobson or Pat Robertson and the 700 Club or the Moral Majority, the Family Research Council, even Billy Graham. I knew who Billy Graham was as a kid, but please don't beat me up, Billy Graham fans, for what I'm about to say. I've never watched a Billy Graham crusade in its entirety. I've never watched a Billy Graham crusade on television in its entirety. I'd never been to a Billy Graham crusade. Now, I did go to a crusade once I was already a pastor, a senior pastor of a church in Minneapolis that was led by Franklin Graham. And so I experienced his preaching, but I'm just, please don't beat me up. I'm just telling you, I guess I'm too urban. I was in the African-American church, but evangelicalism was introduced to me as good news. The good news, the declaration and demonstration of Jesus Christ. I'm not here to say that those other expressions of evangelicalism that I mentioned aren't the good news. I'm just saying it's not the evangelicalism I was raised on. I was raised in the Black church in the city of Minneapolis, and I was raised that evangelicalism was good news, and that good news, the way I experienced it, was preached good news, revivals, preaching that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and that Jesus Christ died on the cross and rose. Now, I was hearing this in the Black church too. So I don't want you to hear that my experience in the Black church didn't have rich theology, didn't have rich, for you theologians paying attention to this show, I knew in the Black church what ecclesiology was, what Christology was, what epistemology is, what existentialism is. Like I knew those things in the Black church, but evangelicalism, it helped me understand those same things outside the African-American context or the African-American cultural, spiritual package in which I experienced it in the Black church. That's what I'm saying. So hearing someone like Tony Campolo, Mark Rutledge, even hearing African-Americans who didn't necessarily grow up from their childhood in the Black church, like John Perkins, Tom Skinner, who gave their lives to Christ later on in life. I'm just saying that the evangelicalism that I came to understand was the preached good news. You must be born again. The Bible is central and authoritative. God is 3 in 1. We are called to the local church. We are called to make disciples of all nations. I experienced those things in the black church too, but I just experienced them in other cultural nuances and forms through evangelicalism. So I'm a product of both evangelicalism, the form that I told you about, and the black church. Okay? So why did I tell you all that? Well, because until I made my way to this multiracial Methodist church, I only knew the church in black and white. So when I was a teenager, until I was influenced by this multi-ethnic United Methodist Church, I saw the church as the church was either a black church or a white church in the city. As a kid growing up in Minneapolis, I really didn't, I can't tell you about the Hispanic church. I can tell you about the Hispanic church, the Latina church now, because there are many expressions of that in the city. I can tell you about various forms of the Asian church, Korean churches, Chinese churches. I can talk about that now because I've seen those expressions of the church as I've lived in the Bay Area, as I've worked in Los Angeles, as I've seen the church grow and further develop. But the church as I knew it, it was black and white. And if I think back to my childhood of black and white television, this was before, like when I was a kid, this was before cable and direct TV and live streaming. So before Hulu and Netflix and Amazon Prime and the Disney streaming channel, before all that, a black and white TV with 5 channels. And that's what I thought the church was when I was a kid, growing up in the city. Growing up in the city, what I thought the church was, it was black and white, and it only had a few channels: Methodist, Lutheran, Baptist, Catholic. That's the only channels I knew. Now, there might be other folks, you knew other channels, but I knew Methodist, Lutheran, Baptist, white Baptist, a black and white TV. Well, now, man, I see the church and its potential in HD. Full color, and the picture being so good that it looks like it's real. Okay, I'm cutting to the chase right now a little bit. What if the church was like that when it came to heaven? What if instead of the church being in black and white, segregated by race and ethnicity, what if all over the United States of America, in every major city, there were multiple thriving, vibrant, flourishing expressions of the church that looked like heaven in HD, where it was so compelling that when you were experiencing worship, small group, hanging out in the parking lot, when you were having coffee with somebody in the lobby area, when you were connecting with folks during the week, going deeper in your faith walk, it felt like heaven was touching you. There are TVs nowadays. I think it was 4D. Is that the new thing out now? I don't know. There are TVs now that when you're the screens are so large and the picture is such high quality that you can watch a football game at your house and feel like you were at the game, especially if you have surround sound. You can watch the Grammys and feel like you are there where the Grammys are taking place. What if the church was so missional and multi-ethnic, multicultural that you felt like you were touching heaven? You felt like heaven came into your living room of life. Okay. See how I cut to the chase already? There were so many things I was supposed to say in between that and what I started at the beginning. I just went to the punchline. So I hope you'll still hang with me though, okay? Because we got a little ways to go here. So hang with me. But what I'm saying is when I read United by Faith, when I read Divided by Faith, that's the kind of passion that rose up in me. My experience of being in the black church and a multi-ethnic church that was predominantly white, I didn't want those to be two separate experiences. I wanted that to be a combined experience in my life. And I don't say that in any disrespect to the African American church, to the Black church. I am indebted to the Black church. I stay connected to it now. I actually teach doctoral classes at a seminary on transformational African American church leadership. I seek to equip and teach and equip African American pastors to be fruitful, faithful African American church leaders. But I also have a deep passion about a church that looks like heaven, which is why I co-pastor with someone who's not African American. I co-pastor a church in the heart of one of the most diverse cities in America because there is something that has just grabbed me like I can't describe about the multi-ethnic church. I should give a plug right there. Like if you're not in a multi-ethnic church and you want to check out one that's fun and funny, missional and messy, blessed and broken, come check out Bayside Midtown. Bayside Midtown in Sacramento, California. Like you can go on our website, baysideonline.com. But the first picture you might not see, might not look like us. You might see some dude named Lincoln Brewster with spiked hair and go, what's multi-ethnic about that? Well, if you get to know him, I think he's got some multi-ethnic tendencies. Love you, Lincoln Brewster. But when you go to the website, it'll say select a campus and you click on Midtown and then you can check out what we're doing. But man, I would love it if you came and visited us. I would love it, man. Bob Ballion, who I co-pastor with, and we would just be elated and excited if you wanted to come check us out. So baysideonline.com, select a campus, Midtown, yes. Or you can even follow us. We have an Instagram page, Bayside Midtown. We have a Facebook page, Bayside Midtown. We have a Twitter page. A lot of people aren't really doing Twitter unless you're a politician. That was funny to me. Okay, Bayside Midtown. So just so you know, you can find out more about us. But come check us out because I think there's something compelling. It's not perfect, but something promising. What could be in the multi-ethnic church. And so I'd love for you to check us out. So now that I put in that plug about our church, I want to get back to, again, why was United by Faith and Divided by Faith such powerful resources to me? Well, it's because, again, Divided by Faith came out in 2000. United by Faith came out in 2003. In 2003, my wife, Danisha, and I, along with 25 other people, we set out to plant a church in North Minneapolis in a community that was 68% African American. We stepped into the journey of planting an intentional, urban, multi-ethnic, multiracial church. Still going today, called the Sanctuary Covenant Church in North Minneapolis, pastored by Edrin Williams. Shout out to Edrin. And he's got a great, diverse staff, men and women preaching, teaching, leading worship. It's incredible. And so we set out to plant that church in 2003, believing that a church that looks like heaven could have a significant impact in the city. Now, because I got these books in front of me that I didn't realize at the time that I was stepping into a growing, developing movement of men and women around the country that were feeling led by God to plant multi-ethnic churches. I didn't know at the time about churches like Fellowship Memphis down in Tennessee. I didn't know at the time, even preceding me, about Third Street Church of God that Samuel Hines had pastored, back in the 80s and 90s. And then Cheryl Sanders became the senior pastor of this church in Washington, D.C. So I didn't know about this movement of people that were intentionally planting multi-ethnic churches in urban centers. And I didn't even know that there was a history of pioneers like Samuel Hines, pioneers like Curtis DeYoung, that had come before me and had, pastored either to plant or to revitalize existing churches to become multi-ethnic and multiracial. I didn't know about even further than that back in the 1940s, a theologian and mystic named Howard Thurman participated in planting what many believe might be the first multiracial church in America, called the Fellowship for All Peoples. That Howard Thurman, this theologian, Presbyterian, mystic, that he planted this church with a group of people to intentionally be multiracial. I didn't know that later in Mississippi that John Perkins, one of those African American evangelical preachers that influenced my life, that he would be a part of planting what is believed as the first intentionally multiracial church plant in the Deep South, Voice of Calvary. And so I didn't know at the time when we were planting Sanctuary that I was standing on shoulders and that I was rubbing up against shoulders of peers that were being led by the Lord to plant churches all over the country. I didn't know at the time about David Anderson and Bridgeway Church in Maryland. I didn't know at the time about people that were just all over the place planting these churches. I didn't know about Mark Damas, who planted Mosaics in Little Rock, Arkansas. I didn't know about Erwin McManus and Mosaic Church in Los Angeles. I didn't know about Dave Gibbons and New Life Church, New Song Church, New Song. But I would later understand that God was calling me into an army of men and women that preceded me and were venturing out the same time I was and would plant later. I didn't know about Eugene Cho and Quest Church in Seattle. I didn't know, man, it's so many. I didn't know about Robert Gelinas and his church, Colorado Christian Center in the Denver area. That it would warm my heart to realize that God was calling me into a movement intentionally in cities of churches that would look like heaven. So I end up years later writing my own book. Now it sounds like another plug, like I plugged my church. Now I'm plugging a book. But so, yes, I am. So I wrote a book called The Post-Black and Post-White Church, Becoming the Beloved Community in a Multi-Ethnic World. And so I joined this group not only as a church planter and a pastor, but trying to make my own contribution as a writer, as a public theologian, as a practitioner in multi-ethnic church. So this is what I want to do. I want to conclude this episode. We're going to come back to this issue again. This won't be the only City Beats episode where we talk about the church and the church being multi-ethnic, or even critique the multi-ethnic church, because there are definitely people. We'll get to this down the road. We didn't get to this today, but there's a great book called The Elusive Dream: The Power of Race in Interracial Churches by sociologist Corey Edwards. And she actually has some criticisms of the multi-ethnic, multiracial church, especially when it just becomes one other place to just assimilate into the dominant culture of the church. So if people of different ethnicities come into a church and all they do is assimilate into one ethnicity, one race, one dominant culture, that's not really a sneak preview of heaven. That's just a social assimilation community. And so we could talk about that another time, but I want to end on this. Another book, man, I'm like a library on this episode, man. But another book that really hit me a few years ago was this book by David Olson, The American Church in Crisis. David Olson, The American Church in Crisis. He was talking about how the church in the United States of America is in decline. The majority of churches in the United States of America are either in decline or stagnant. And he makes a case for the need to plant churches all across the United States of America. But he zeroes in on, at one point in his book, why it's so important to plant churches in cities, but also talks about why churches that are planted should intentionally be multi-ethnic, multiracial, and that even existing churches could find new life by being revitalized, redeveloped, by becoming multi-ethnic. So I believe that. And I'm going to end this episode with this. Why is it that the church should be multi-ethnic? And why is the city, the heart of the city, a place for that to happen? Well, one, race is still an issue. We are polarized, we are divided, we are broken, we are pitted against each other as bitter enemies through the social structure, systems, ideologies of race and racial oppression. And so in the midst of that reality, racial division, racial oppression, racial brokenness, drawing racial lines in the sand, racism, and the ugliest forms of racism, like things that are hard to talk about, like white supremacy. There is a need for the church to be a balm in Gilead, to be medicine, to be soothing, to be transformative, to be a sneak preview of heaven. And so I do believe that there's a need for all kinds of expressions of the church. The church should be real to its surrounding community. If you're at a church and you walk outside the doors and whatever direction you walk in, it's majority white, then you should be the best, flourishing, healthy, thriving white church you can be. If you walk outside the doors of where you worship and you go 5-6 blocks in either direction and all you see are Koreans, you should be the healthiest, thriving, missional Korean church you can be. That's what you should do. But if you go out and you see great diversity, then you should be a multi-ethnic, multicultural, intergenerational, Christ-centered church. You should strive to be that. It's the mission field around you. It's why our church strives to be who we are at Bayside Midtown. We're in the heart of the city of Sacramento, and Sacramento is one of the most multicultural, multi-ethnic cities in America. We want to be a center of transformation in this city. And that leads me to the last thing I'll say about why the church should be multi-ethnic in the city. Because the city is so ripe for this. Yes, the city has challenges. There are still homogeneous pockets, ghettos, under-resourced communities. The city grapples with the impact of gentrification. There's homelessness. There are divides between the have and the have-nots. But yet, the city is also a beautiful picture of what heaven's going to be. Now we can debate and go, well, yeah, but the Lamb is at the center of heaven. Of course. But the city, in its diversity, offers such a great opportunity for the church to live out the Great Commission, to make disciples of all nations, to present the whole gospel, salvation, compassion, justice, empowerment, liberation, the entire gospel. So I hope that I stirred something in you just a little bit about the multi-ethnic church. As I said, this will not be the only episode that we talk about this. Matter of fact, from time to time, I will have other pastors of multi-ethnic churches, which we've already done in the past, on this show. Also, I will have guests that lead businesses, that serve communities that are diverse, because I think we could learn something in a diverse urban church from those leaders. So this won't be the only topic on City Beats. And those of you that watch this, listen to it on a regular basis, know that to be true. But this will be an important topic that we'll come back to from time to time. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for paying attention to City Beats. I'm Efrem Smith, and I can't wait to be with you again.